Welcome everyone to JupyterLab Basics for Finance 372. JupyterLab allows you to put your code, the output of your code, and beautiful text markup all in the same file. So we can see what you're doing, why you're doing it, and the results that you get. To see how this works, let's create a new JupyterLab notebook. And then let's rename the notebook to JupyterLab Basics. Okay, you can see here what you get in a JupyterLab notebook is a series of cells. This is a first cell, and for each cell we can choose whether to have that cell be code or markdown. A markdown cell is free text that we can write whatever we want. So in our first cell, let's type JupyterLab Basics. Give ourselves a new line and say this is our first real notebook. Let's calculate 1 plus 1. All right, this is just free text. You can enter whatever you want here. And let's press the play button, which runs the selected cells and advances to the next cell. When we run a markdown cell like this, JupyterLab will convert it into nice formatted text here. All right, now this next cell we're going to use code. So code is where you type your Python code. In this case, we're going to start with something really simple, and that is just 1 plus 1. To start with, you can think about Python like a calculator. Like any calculator, you can type 1 plus 1. Now you press this play key, you run this cell, and Python will give you output of 2. 1 plus 1 equals 2. Okay, so notice with code, the JupyterLab will show us our code and the output simultaneously. With Markdown, once we run the cell, it will only show the output, which is this formatted text. Okay, so now let's create another markdown cell so we can tell everyone what we're doing. Now let's try some multiplication. All right, we run that cell and we can see that's our note to our cells, what we're doing. Let's try some multiplication. 2 times 3. The way you do multiplication in Python is with the star symbol here. And let's also try 6 times 5. Okay, and let's run this cell. And you'll notice what happens here is that Python has computed 2 times 3 equals 6, and it's computed 6 times 5 equals 30, but it's only showing us the output from the last. Okay, so let's create another markdown cell here and note that above only prints the last result. To make sure Jupyter prints everything you want to print, use the print function in Python. And this print function can combine multiple outputs separated by a comma. Okay, so that's going to be our note. This is explaining what we're going to do. Now we can do that. Okay, so the print, let's say to tell Python to print 1 plus 1. And a new line, print 2 times 3, print 6 times 5. And now let's print a message that says 2 to the power of 4 equals, and then 2 star star 4. We need a comma there. Okay, so what this print command is doing is it's telling Python to print the first thing and then the second thing. The second thing here is 2 to the power of 4. The way you do powers in Python is with 2 stars. So if we run this code cell and advance, you see that it prints all 4 of these things. The results of 6 times 5 is 30, and the result of 2 to the power of 4 is 6. So you can see now how a JupyterLab notebook can combine messages with code and output. Okay, but it would be nice to make this a little bit better formatted. Okay, so how are we going to? So there's a bunch of different tricks, a bunch of different commands you can write in these markup cells to make them prettier. So I'm going to show you a few of those now. All right, the first is that we can write headings using this pound sign or hashtag, whatever you want to call it. All right, so this is heading number 1. If we run this cell, you can see it produces a big, bold heading. But we can also do 2 pound signs for heading 2. Got to make sure we have this be a markdown cell. 3 for heading 3, and you get the idea. The most we can do is heading 6. So if we run this cell, you can see that it produces increasingly small headings. All right, now what if instead of a heading we want to have inside of our sentence some emphasis on certain words? We can do that using, make sure we go to Markdown, emphasize, text, and you can emphasize it even more with 2 stars or even more with 3 stars. Okay, so we run a cell like this. You can see that 1 star creates an italic, 2 stars makes bold, 3 stars makes italic and bold. All right, now if we want to insert a line break, let's see if we try it this way. Insert a line break, Markdown. Insert a line break here. So if I just press enter, what happens when I run this? Nothing. Okay, it does not recognize that line break. To make a line break happen, you can insert an extra line here. But if you do that, you get an extra line in the output. Okay, so the way to make sure that you get a line break where you want is using this BR command. You put the BR there. Now if we run this, you will get a line break exactly where you want it. Okay, another cool way we can format a Markdown is by adding a quote. So if we want to quote a reference, for example, we can use this. All you have to do is add this little caret here, and you can type this is a quote, and run that, and you get this indented quote. Often when you're doing sort of this kind of informal writing, you'll want to have bullet points. We can do that as well, very simply. Bullets, you just start on your own line. We have to mark down. Start on your own line. And just do a little dash here, just like you're making an outline. And then Jupyter will convert this into a pretty bullet points. Okay. Now instead of bullet points, we can also do numbered lists. The way you do that is you just type a 1 instead of a dash. So you don't have to number them yourself. You always use 1. And you just use your tabs to go into lower levels. Shift tab to go back out to second. Okay, so every number is a 1. You don't have to figure out the numbers yourself because when you run, Jupyter will figure out the levels and the numbers. So 1, A, B, 2, etc. Okay, so maybe you want to make a checklist. You can do that too. So let's make a checklist. Checklist. The way you do that is you start with like you would with a bullet, but now you put this symbol here. If it's empty, the task is incomplete. If it's complete, if it's X'd, the task is complete. Okay, so we can then play this. You can also have pretty tables in here. So if you want to tabulate some results, you can do that in here as well. Here is a table. Now for tables, if you want to type this in by hand, it's quite painful. So I'm just going to copy one in for now. All right, so this is what the tables look like. It's sort of your best ASCII impersonation of a table. Okay, so then if we run that selected cell, you see we get a much prettier looking table than in the ASCII format. All right, but it seems like it would be painful to go through and type this out by hand, you know, where you're trying to do like this, and then CD, you know, that looks awful, right? So in practice, you don't do that. Instead, what you do is you use an online tool like this one to generate your own tables. Use a table generator. Let's make this Markdown. And then this, I can show you how to make a link. So by putting these brackets here, this is the text that we will have the link attached to. And then we can copy in the link. And so let's write that out just so we know, have for records. Text in brackets followed by web address Okay, and so we can see, we can click on this and it will go to that website for us. All right, so that's how you would actually generate a table. You can make your table first in Excel or wherever, and then use this table generator to go into Jupyter. Okay, next we may want to add a little bit of snippet of code in here so we can explain a piece of code that we're using inside of our markup. So the way you would do this is, here is an inline snippet of code. Has to use 3 of these single quotes. And then you put your code snippet in here. So let's just make it 1 + 1, and then you press 3 more single quotes to close the code snippet. Another option is if you want it to be formatted instead of inline as its own line, you can do it this way. Okay, you have to again use its own line now, 3 single quotes. You have to tell it you're using Python. Then you can do, let's say for example, print 1 + 1, and now you can see that it has the pretty Python formatting. So if we run this cell here, you see that the inline code snippet has just a gray box around it, and the formatted one looks like this. Okay, so that's a code snippet inside of a markdown. So it doesn't actually run that code. It's just a way of showing how your code might work inside of a markup. The last thing I'll tell you is if you don't like writing markup inside of JupyterLab, you may also want to use a tool from outside JupyterLab, and I will put some information in this notebook about that. All right, so we have some tricks now for formatting our markdown. So let's go back to our top part here where we're mixing markdown, where we explain what we do, code, and output. So let's make our markdown a little prettier. The way you go back to edit markdown is you double click on it. This will get us back into editing this. This will get us back into editing this, etc. Okay, so we go back in here. Let's make this our header. Let's make it heading 2. The way we do that is with 2 number signs. And then let's, since this is our title, let's make it emphasized, which will be bold and italic. All right, and then if we run the markdown now, that looks prettier. Code is, and we don't do any formatting with our code. The code stays as is. Let's try some multiplication. That sounds good. Let's make multiplication italicized. Run that. Let's make this print a, let's just use an inline code snippet by using 3 single quotes. So if we run that, now you can see that this is a print function. Okay, and there we go. So that's the basics for JupyterLab. You'll learn way more about this as you go, but this is enough to get you started and to make some pretty JupyterLab. All right, so now we have a nice JupyterLab notebook, and let's say it's formatted the way we want, and we want to output this to show it to someone else on your team or to turn it in for home. One of the great things about JupyterLab is that you can output straight to HTML. So let's show how to do that. You go to File, Export Notebook as HTML. Click on that, and you'll see it opens up a new browser window. Here's the thing we just outputted. We load that up, and ta-da, here's a beautiful website formatted using everything we just did into an HTML page. You can upload this to the web or share it with anyone else. If you want a PDF, you can just print this as a PDF and share it that way as well. All right, that's all for today. I encourage you to download the JupyterLab notebook I created and use it as your reference for formatting your own notebooks, and get in there and play around with it, try some new things, and hopefully you'll get a little more comfortable with JupyterLab.